sometimes known as the golden period, in which vital clues may be gained or lost. And the Portuguese police records show that Marat was the interpreter for all these English-speaking witnesses. I'm now going to show how Marat strayed well beyond his role as an interpreter by quoting from a report by one of Gonçalo Amaral's key senior staff, Inspector Veranda. He was so concerned about Marat's conduct as an interpreter that on the 11th of May, after Marat had been translating for a week, he filed a complaint about him to Amaral, who was leading the investigation. Veranda made these 8 key accusations against him. He kept on asking insistently about the identity of possible suspects. He kept on asking about the strategy of the investigation. He kept on asking about what work was going on to be done in the coming days. He kept on trying to steal a look at confidential documents. He had detailed knowledge of the Ocean Club garden. He had detailed knowledge of what the McCanns and their friends had been doing that week in Praia de Luz. He actively tried to influence the conduct of the investigation. He persistently suggested that foreigners were responsible for abducting Madeleine. At point 5, Inspector Veranda states that Marat had detailed knowledge of the Ocean Club garden. But as we saw earlier, when Marat gave his first untrue statement to the police, he told the Portuguese police he did not know the interior of the Ocean Club, only entering the resort after the disappearance. I do not believe that Marat had never in his life entered the Ocean Club until after Madeleine had been reported missing. I also want to highlight this part of Marat's first statement. He started a conversation with the family of the child, offering to help. Together with an officer of the GNR and an employee of the resort with several keys, entered several apartments, opened with the keys or by the tenants in order to locate the child. Some of the apartments were closed and there were no keys. These sites were flagged by the GNR man. At that time, he met John Hill, manager of Mark Warner, who supplied them with more keys to the other apartments. So, was Robert Marat already acquainted with the McCanns? I will return to that subject in a moment. We see here that he was able to talk to the McCanns on the morning after Madeleine had been reported missing. But just as interesting is why Marat was invited by Mark Warner top brass and Ocean Club manager John Hill to accompany him and a GNR police officer as he went round the Ocean Club opening up various apartments. And after that, the GNR officer and Marat were given keys to other apartments. I can understand a GNR officer being given keys, but I cannot see any valid reason as to why Marat should accompany him. It looks to me as though Marat was rapidly, on the very first morning following Madeleine's disappearance, being given great privileges, both searching the apartments and being made the chief interpreter. Not surprisingly, after receiving Inspector Veranda's report, Gonçalo Amaral soon removed him from his interpreting duties. But how much valuable information could Marat have passed on to others from the very heart of the investigation? Let me turn now to an astonishing sequence of events which seemed designed to put Robert Marat in the frame as the lead suspect for having allegedly abducted Madeleine McCann. As I have mentioned, due to the evidence in my previous film, I believe Madeleine was already dead before Marat got to Portugal, so I am making no suggestion that Marat was involved in Madeleine's death. The first person I've been able to determine to publicly point the finger at Marat was a young journalist called Laurie Campbell, who was working for the Daily Mirror and the Independent at the time. Laurie Campbell had previously worked very closely with Clarence Mitchell, the McCann's PR representative, in covering the Soham murders case. He was then working for the BBC as a crime correspondent. It's also interesting that Leicestershire Police referred Laurie Campbell not to the Portuguese police, but to the British Embassy, who, remember, helped secure the appointment of Marat as the main interpreter. Portuguese investigative journalist Paulo Reis assessed the involvement of Laurie Campbell and made these observations. On the 6th of May 2007, a female CID officer in the Leicestershire Constabulary faxed the Portugal incident room, stating that Laurie Campbell, a reporter for the Sunday Mirror, had been in contact. Laurie has been speaking to an interpreter who has been helping the Portuguese authorities with the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance. He has only given his name as Rob and has not given any background information about himself. Laurie has become suspicious of Rob as he has given conflicting accounts of various people, and he became very concerned when he noticed his photo being taken by the Mirror's photographer. Rob stated to Laurie that he was going through a messy divorce in the UK at the moment and that he had a 3-year-old daughter just like Madeleine, from whom he is separated. He made a big show of telephoning his daughter in front of reporters, and Laurie felt he was being too loud and making a big thing of it. The things that Rob said to Laurie have raised her concerns about him. Could you please call Laurie, who is still in Portugal, to establish further details to identify Rob in order to eliminate him from your inquiries? The Leicestershire police were impressively quick in forwarding Miss Campbell's information to the PJ, in stark contrast to the way they handled some other matters, such as statements made by the Gaspers about David Payne talking to Jerry McCann about asking him whether Madeleine would perform a paedophilic act. Murat then came under suspicion and the PJ intercepted his telephone, picking up some interesting chats with Martin Brunt of Sky News and a conversation with Phil, a British police officer, whom Murat asked about the ways mobile phone signals could be traced to specific locations. Mr. Murat's interest seemed to be whether such tracking would prove he was at home during the critical hours of Thursday the 3rd of May 2007. It is my opinion that Laurie Campbell is probably a British Security Services asset, and that once Murat had performed his role of whatever he did between the 1st and 4th of May, they decided, with the help of Campbell and others, to set him up as yet another patsy abductor to confuse the investigation. As the British and Portuguese police began investigating Murat, the media went to town on him, filling their front pages with their suspicions about him and generally suggesting that he was the man responsible for abducting Madeleine. Murat's backstory featured heavily in the various media accounts. Less than a year later, these newspapers had to pay him £600,000 in libel damages plus his costs. Gonçalo Amaral wrote about this in his book. He explains how on the second day after Madeleine was reported missing, Sunday the 5th of May, a Glenn Power was appointed as the British police official liaison officer attached to the British Embassy. Quite why it was necessary for any British police to get involved so quickly has never been explained. He must have been dispatched to Portugal as soon as news broke of Madeleine's disappearance. 2 days later, says Amaral, more English police officers arrived. One of them was a high-ranking officer from Leicestershire Police, Detective Chief Superintendent Bob Small, with 2 colleagues from Leicestershire. Amaral was bemused by this influx of the British police force. In his book he writes, "We insist on knowing what our English counterparts have come to Portugal to do. I assign one of my investigators to follow the English superintendent like a shadow and to keep me informed about his actions." They weren't helping the Portuguese, they were actively hindering them. Amaral goes on, little by little the number of English police officers grows exponentially. Again, we have to ask, as Amaral did, what were they really there for? Were they working for the British Security Services?